Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into Franchise Hockey Manager 11 again. This forms part of our guide series, and honestly this one might be the trickiest topic to explain. We're going over all the ways to bring players onto your team in FHM11, from the draft to trades and beyond. So by the end, you should know exactly how to build yourself a powerhouse roster. Now, before we jump into the details, let's quickly go over the main ways that you can bring players onto your team. First, you've got the NHL Draft, where you can pick top young talent. Next, you've got the free agency, where you can sign players who don't currently have a contract. You also have the trade feature, letting you swap players and picks with other teams. And then there's waivers, which allows you to manage players between your NHL and AHL teams while giving other teams a chance to claim them. Finally, you can also sign international and college free agents, adding skilled players from overseas or from college systems directly onto your roster. Each method has its own strategy, so let's break them down one by one. So let's start with the draft feature. This is one of the most exciting ways to bring fresh talent onto your team. In the NHL Draft, teams will have a chance to select young players, typically aged between 18 and 20, who haven't played in the NHL. But how do players actually become part of this draft pool? Well, most players in the draft come from junior hockey leagues, college teams, or international leagues. In Franchise Hockey Manager, you'll see prospects from the Canadian junior leagues like the OHL, WHL, or the QMJHL. The US NCAA college system also feeds many players into that draft pool, and you'll even find top prospects from European leagues like the Swedish Hockey League, Finnish Liga, and the Russian KHL. These leagues are where scouts typically watch players develop and gauge their potential. Franchise Hockey Manager reflects this process by generating a realistic pool of eligible players based on their age, skill, and performance in these leagues. Each team in the game can evaluate these players and decide which fits best into their strategy. You'll often see scouting reports or stats that give you hints about the player's strengths, weaknesses, and potential future development. In the draft, your goal is to pick players who could either help your team immediately or develop into stars over time. Scouting is key here. Franchise Hockey Manager provides scouting tools to help you evaluate prospects. You might look for a forward with scoring potential, a reliable defenseman, or a solid goaltender. Teams that struggled last season get earlier picks in each round, which gives them a chance to grab the best talent available and rebuild. There are 7 rounds in the draft, and in each round, teams select players in reverse order of last season's standings. But there's also a draft lottery, a feature that keeps things interesting. In Franchise Hockey Manager, teams at the very bottom of the standings have a chance to win that lottery and move up to the top of the draft order, giving them the first pick. This can be a huge advantage because getting a first overall pick means you'll land a franchise player, someone who can carry your team for years. So, the draft is a critical tool for rebuilding and strengthening your team, especially if you're focused on long-term success. In Franchise Hockey Manager, it's your chance to bring in young, promising talent who can develop into star players over time. Next up is free agency, which is your opportunity to sign players who aren't currently on any team's roster. Free agency is split into 2 main types in both the NHL and in Franchise Hockey Manager: unrestricted free agents, or UFAs, and restricted free agents, RFAs. Here is what each type means and how you can use them to improve your lineup. Let's start with an unrestricted free agent. These players are typically more experienced and have played out their contracts, so they're free to sign with any team without restrictions. In FHM11, you'll see a lot of veterans in the UFA pool, players who have years of experience and can bring stability or leadership to your team. For example, if your team needs a solid defenseman to anchor your blue line or a backup goalie with a proven record, UFAs can be a great option. UFAs can make an immediate impact, but they usually come with higher salary demands. In FHM11, you'll need to manage your salary cap carefully when signing UFAs to make sure you're not overcommitting on players past their prime. Free agency begins in the off-season, so you'll have a big pool of players available to choose from right after the playoffs. Just be prepared. Other teams will be competing for these players too, so it could be a bidding war. Next, let's talk about restricted free agents, or RFAs. Unlike UFAs, RFAs are younger players who are still linked to their current team. If you want to sign an RFA, you'll need to make an offer, and then their current team will have a chance to match that offer. If they do match, the player stays with them. But if they don't, you'll get the player, though you may need to give up some draft picks as compensation. This is what's called an offer sheet. Why would you go after an RFA though? Sometimes it's worth targeting RFAs who are emerging stars that could grow into key players for your team. However, going for RFAs can be risky and costly, both in terms of salary and for those draft picks. In real life and in Franchise Hockey Manager, RFAs don't usually move as freely as UFAs, so keep that in mind as you're building your strategy. Now, let's talk about trades, one of the most flexible and impactful ways to build your team. In real life and in the game, trades let you bring in talent without waiting for free agency or the draft. They're a great way to fill specific needs, especially if you've identified a weakness in your lineup or have a surplus in one area that you can leverage for something else. Here's how trades work in Franchise Hockey Manager. You can propose trades with other teams at any point during the season up until the trade deadline. In each trade, you can offer players or draft picks, and you can request players or draft picks in return. The key is to find the right balance, a trade that benefits both sides. Let's go over some strategies. Suppose your team is strong on offense, but is struggling defensively. You might decide to trade away one of your extra forwards for a reliable defenseman. Or, if you are looking to the future and you aren't competing for a championship this season, you might trade a veteran player for draft picks or for younger prospects who can help you down the line. Timing is important when it comes to trades. In Franchise Hockey Manager, just like in the real NHL, there is a trade deadline. Once this deadline passes, you will not be able to make any more trades until the off-season. So if you're gearing up for the playoffs, the trade deadline is the last opportunity for you to tweak your lineup and address any gaps in your team. Another thing to consider is team needs and chemistry. Just because a player has good stats doesn't mean they're the right fit. Think about the roles your players fill. Do you need a scoring forward, a defensive defenseman, or a playmaking centre? For example, if your power play is unperforming, bringing in a player who excels in special teams could be a big difference. Offering a high draft pick might convince another team to give up a star player, or if you're rebuilding, you might trade away your current players to accumulate more picks for the future. Now remember, first round picks are especially valuable, but even later round picks can sometimes land you solid players with the right scouting. Here's a tip. Use the trade evaluation tool. When you're proposing a trade, this tool helps you gauge how interested the other team might be in your offer. It's not going to guarantee that a trade goes through, but it might give you some insight into what they're looking for and lets you adjust your proposal to make it that little bit more appealing. Let's talk about waivers. This is a unique aspect of managing your roster. Waivers are a system used to give other teams a chance to claim players who are being sent down to the minor leagues, like the AHL, or brought up to the NHL. This adds a strategic layer in managing your roster, especially if you're trying to develop younger players without losing them to other teams. So here's how it works. If you want to send a player from your NHL roster down to the AHL, and that player isn't waiver exempt, you need to put them on waivers. Once on waivers, other teams in the league have a chance to claim that player within a 24-hour period. If no one claims them, that player clears the waivers and you're free to assign them to your AHL team. Waivers are typically used for players who are older, have some NHL experience, or are on one-way contracts, meaning that they're paid the same regardless of whether they're in the NHL or the AHL. Younger players and those on entry-level contracts are usually waiver exempt, so you can move them between the NHL and the AHL without putting them at risk of being claimed by other teams. So why would you put your player on waivers? So maybe they're struggling in the NHL and could use more playing time in the minors to get themselves back on form, or maybe to clear a roster spot when you intend to bring someone else in. Timing is everything with waivers. You want to be carefully planning around that waiver wire. For instance, if you have a player who's right on the edge of making your NHL roster but could benefit for some more ice time, you need to weigh the risk of losing them against that benefit of their development. That's it for this guide on how to bring players onto your team in Franchise Hockey Manager. We've talked about everything from the NHL Draft to free agency, trades and waivers. It might sound like a lot, but once you get the hang of these systems, it's actually one of the most fun and rewarding parts of the game. Building your team takes strategy, creativity and sometimes a little patience, but that is what makes it so exciting. Remember,
The best managers don't just rely on one of these methods. They combine all of these tools to craft a roster that fits their vision. So get creative, take some risks, and don't forget to keep an eye on that salary cap while you're at it. If you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to this channel for more FHM11 content. Also, let me know in the comments if there is any other aspects of the game you'd like me to cover. I love hearing your ideas. Thank you very much for watching. Good luck out there. I'll see you on the ice.